Good morning. Welcome to UUCC, the UU Church of Canandaigua. I'm Eileen, I'm your minister, and I'm so glad to be with you today. This morning, we're joined by our guest preacher, Dr. Amy Potter. She is the medical director of Planned Parenthood of Central and Western New York, and she's a family medicine doctor by training. And I want to start us off with just a few quick announcements before we begin our service. The first is that if you're new-ish or visiting, I invite you to sign our virtual guest book. You can get connected with us that way. You can indicate if you'd like to receive our newsletter, if you're not already getting it. So if you're newish, if you just started hanging around here, then please go ahead and sign our virtual guest book. The link is now in the chat. And one more quick announcement, which is that the UUA is asking congregations to hold a vote on whether to include a statement of conscience in the agenda for General Assembly this coming spring. So I'm going to put a link to that statement of conscience in the chat. We'll also put one in our upcoming announcement about when that congregational vote will take place. But you can click the link to read the statement of conscience. It's rather long. It's a little too long for me to read to you right now. And the vote the congregation will be taking is about whether to include that statement on the agenda. So we're not voting on the statement itself, but voting on whether the Assembly of Congregations should vote on it. So whether to put it on the agenda for the General Assembly in June. So you can go ahead and read that, and you'll get an announcement soon from the board about when we will take a vote on that. And with that, let's take a deep breath in and let us enter a space of worship together. And now it's time for us to light our chalice together. If you have a chalice or just an old scented candle hanging around, grab a candle, grab a flame, grab a flashlight, light something with us together. Let's be beacons of light this morning. And as we do, we'll say our chalice lighting words. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, and celebration of the life we share together. And friends, this morning, especially in honor of Dr. Amy joining us, I want to share a story with you that my grandmother told me when I was just old enough to be leaving the house for the first time, going out on my own. And she told me, my grandmother's going to be 95 this year. She told me that when oral birth control first became available, she was a young mother. She had 4 kids and soon 4 stepchildren, and one job to the family and not a lot of resources. And so as soon as it became available for her to have the choice to control the number of children she had in her family, she jumped at it. She asked her doctor for a prescription for oral birth control. She got it immediately. She was the perfect candidate, a mother who already had children at that time, the perfect candidate. And she started taking this medication. It was life-changing for her. All of a sudden, she could see a future where she had enough to feed her family, where she had control over the direction of the rest of her life. And then she heard in the pews at her church that this form of birth control was not allowed, was a sin. And so she went to her priest at this Catholic church, and she asked for a confession. And she went to confession, and she told the priest, I'm taking this medication. I hear it's a sin. I need to confess the sin to you. And the priest said, stop taking it, or you cannot be absolved. And since you cannot be absolved, you can't participate in the community, you can't participate in the activities of the church, you cannot participate in the sacraments of the church. And so she made the hard decision to step back from the participation in this church that was her life, and to continue having control over her reproductive future. And so she sat every Sunday in a pew and did not take communion. She didn't go to confession anymore because she wasn't allowed to participate in those sacraments. And her sister, her oldest sister, who was a nun, noticed at her mother's funeral that she wasn't taking communion. And her oldest sister was a wise woman and noticed many women at this time were refraining from communion, were staying in the pews, were not taking sacraments. And so her oldest sister went over and sat next to her after the funeral and whispered in her ear, Mary, go to confession at St. Gabriel's, one town over. The priest there will be able to absolve you. And she went to confession at St. Gabriel's, and the priest at St. Gabriel's said, there's nothing to absolve. You're in charge of your life. Go forth, participate in the sacraments. And she did. And I tell you this story because I think these are some of the reasons we come to church, because these are these spaces on Sunday mornings, and really not the seats of our legislatures, really not the seats of justice and judges, really not in doctors' offices. These are the spaces where we as a society say that women have the moral authority to make hard ethical choices for themselves. These are the spaces where we claim that authority. And these are spaces where we can do spiritual harm, and we need to be aware of that. And where we can do spiritual healing, and we need to be aware of that. So welcome to this space. Let us treat it like the sacred, holy space with the power that it fully has. I invite you to join us in singing our first hymn together. Our first hymn this morning is Come Sing a Song with Me. And now it's time for a story. This morning's story comes from the Haudenosaunee people, and it's adapted by Alliston McAllister from this book, A Year of Stories. And it's called How the Bear Clan Learned to Heal. And there's a picture. Three young hunters were running home one evening when a rabbit jumped out ahead of them and sat in the middle of the trail. The hunters stopped. They'd already caught plenty of game, but each one reached for his bow, plucked an arrow from his quiver, and shot at the rabbit. To their surprise, the arrows returned without a spot of blood on them. As they reached for second arrows, the rabbit disappeared. In its place stood a bent old woman. "I'm sick," said the old woman weakly. "Please help me find food and a place to rest." The young hunters didn't want to be bothered by the old woman. Ignoring her plea, they put away their arrows and ran on down the trail. They didn't notice the old woman turn and follow. When she reached the hunters' settlement, the old woman noticed many lodges. In front of each lodge was a sign hanging on a pole, and that was the sign of the clan that lived within. The old woman stopped at the lodge of the Wolf clan and asked the elder there for shelter, but she wouldn't let him in. "We don't want sickness here," she said, and so the woman shuffled on. The young man at the Beaver Lodge insisted they had no food to share. The Turtle Clan and Deer Clan both sent her away. The old woman asked for help at the sign of the hawk, the snipe, the heron, but everyone shook their heads. Night fell and the air grew cold. At last, she came to the lodge of the Bear Clan. When the Bear Clan mother saw the sick old woman, she lifted the blanket over the door and welcomed her inside. She gave her a bowl of warm corn mash and spread soft skins for her to rest on. The old woman was grateful. The next day, she told her what herbs to fetch from the woods to make her well, and soon she was healed. The old woman stayed with the Bear Clan mother, and a few days later, she became sick again. As before, the mother cared for her. She was told what roots and leaves to use for medicine, and she made the old woman well. Many times the old woman fell ill, once with a fever, another time with pain, a rash, a cough. Each time the woman instructed the Bear Clan about the flowers and plants to use for her condition, and they listened and learned well. Before long, the Bear Clan knew more about healing than anyone else in all the clans. One evening, under the stars, the old woman gave the clan mother thanks. "I was sent to the earth by the Great Spirit to teach people the secrets of healing," she said. "You were the only one who really saw me and welcomed me to your fireside. You were the only one who listened. And now I have taught you how to use the plants and roots to heal the sick. And from this day, all other clans will come to you to learn from the Bear Clan how to heal." The clan mother was filled with joy. She gazed at the sky and thanked the Great Spirit for this precious gift. But when she turned toward the old woman, she had disappeared. All she saw was a rabbit running down the trail. And this is the end of our story. Now is the time in our service when we share our joys and our sorrows with one another. We are a community that holds each other in our greatest celebrations and in our deepest pain. So I ask you this morning to use our chat function to share what it is that sits on your heart today. What are you feeling and where are you with your spirit? Are there joys or sorrows to lift up this morning? This morning, we hold so much in our hearts, so much joy about vaccinations, and some prayers for patience as we wait for ours. Gratitude for this welcoming space, for our secret elves whose gifts keep giving. Concern for Alex and Chelsea, and gratitude that their girls are safe. Joy and congratulations for Laura's exam success. prayers of care for Carrie's patient, worry at right-wing violence and conspiracy theory, joy at the soon-to-be-born grandchild for Gigi, and the simple joy of no sorrows big enough to share this morning. For these, and for all the joys and sorrows left in the silence of our hearts, know that we are with you. And now is the time in our service for our plate offering. I invite you into the spiritual practice of generosity this morning. If you'd like to give to this morning's offering, you can find a couple ways to do so in your chat. You can give on our website, which is canandaiguauu.org/connection/donate. Or you can give this morning by mailing a check to the church at 3024 Cooley Road in Canandaigua. Or you can ask your bank to set up an automatic recurring plate gift for Sunday mornings. And in any of these cases, if you make a note that your gift is intended to go to our Sunday morning offering for this week, it'll be shared with our designated offering recipient for the month, Worker Justice Center of New York. Each month, we share a quarter of our plate offerings with a community partner, and the Worker Justice Center is this month's partner. We thank you for your generosity this morning.
Hello, everyone. My name again is Amy Potter, and I'm excited to spend a few minutes with you all today, and starting with a meditation together and some centering together. What I'd like to do this morning is what's called the Heart Center meditation. At the end, I'll put in a link to a video that you can find online where you can go back and do this again if it resonates for you. So you can let your eyes close or find a soft spot to focus on. You can also place your hands in what's called the Heart Center Mudra. This helps to run energy to the heart center and stimulate the heart chakra. So I'll try to demonstrate here for you all. You can practice the mudra by placing your right hand over your chest, over the sternum, kind of a central midline spot, and then placing the left hand over the right with the thumbs touching. If that's hard to do, you can think about propping your elbows up on a space and kind of giving yourself a little assist. So we'll leave our hands here as we begin to add our mind and that component of the meditation. So this meditation is a series of 4 mantras to breathe to. The first mantra is compassion. Compassion is oceanic, limitless, and it starts with yourself. Let's call in compassion into our space. Let's invite it in like it's a friend this morning. Call compassion into your body to join you and teach you. So with the breath, we'll call in compassion. Inhale, compassion. Limitless, oceanic compassion. The second attribute this morning is innate harmony. Innate harmony is the center point. It's the calm in the midst of chaos. It's the eye of the hurricane. In the same way that we did with compassion, we will call in innate harmony with our breath. Inhale, innate harmony. The third attribute is healing presence. Healing presence is the desire and longing towards healing. Everything moves towards healing. When we have destruction, we then have healing and growth. It's love in action. So with our breath, we'll call in innate healing presence. We'll add that healing presence into our room. Finally, the fourth mantra is unconditioned, unconditional love. It's reverence, awe, it's the word wow. It's the ability to see everything for what it is instead of asking it to be something different than what it is. So let's call that in. With an inhale, we'll call in unconditioned, unconditional love. Now that we've invited in each of these attributes, we'll continue by repeating the mantras to ourselves with each breath. With an inhale, we bring in compassion, innate harmony, healing presence, and unconditioned, unconditional love.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Thank you so much for that beautiful music to close our meditation. I went ahead and included a link for that full meditation by somebody I look up to, Dr. Anne-Marie Chiasson. So if you're interested, you can check that out later. So again, good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me to join you. I'm really honored to share this space with you today. I want to start out with a few disclaimers. First and foremost, I'm a physician and don't consider myself a religious expert or a regular orator, but I'm enjoying exploring this new opportunity. Additionally, I have not spent much time in church in recent memory. I was raised in the Methodist tradition, but disconnected from that in my adolescence after feeling a bit bullied by kids in youth group. I came home one night after choir practice in tears and told my mom, the only people who are mean to me are at church, which seems like the opposite thing that the Bible talks about. They're such hypocrites. Why do I have to keep going? And to her credit, she told me I made a good point and that I could make my own decision about my faith. I stopped attending youth group and choir practice in middle school, but since that time, I've described myself as spiritual. and I hold on to practices or religious themes that make sense to me, even if they're from varying traditions. I meditate, I use tapping techniques, I love the Tibetan singing bowl my husband and I picked up on our travels, but I also celebrate Christmas and the opportunity to be grateful for my family and those Christian traditions. My faith runs deep, even if that doesn't manifest as quoted verses from the Bible. My final disclaimer this morning is this. I'm going to use the word woman a lot throughout this talk. I want to be clear that when I use that term, I am using it expansively to refer to any person who identifies as a woman, as female, as feminine, even if that's just at times. This includes cis women, trans women, and other identities that encompass womanhood, femininity, and other words and definitions and labels that we choose to apply. Finally, the themes that we discuss today are absolutely translatable and applicable to all people, but particularly to any marginalized or stigmatized group. But I'm intentionally focusing on women today because the ability to access high quality reproductive health care in our country is severely limited and handicapped by stigma, genderism, sexism, and racism. To put it more simply, we just still don't trust women. In recent years, all three branches of the US government have shown us this time and time again. In 2019, a rule was passed that threatens abortion coverage for all Affordable Care Act or Obamacare participants. We also call the Affordable Care Act in medicine the ACA, because we like to make everything into an acronym. This means that the 3.4 million pregnant people that have ACA plans may have to decide between continuing unwanted or unintended pregnancies or having to endure severe financial stress to themselves and their families in order to obtain the care that they need, which can cost them thousands or more out of pocket. The Affordable Care Act requires that most health plans cover a range of preventive services, including contraceptives, with no out-of-pocket costs. But this provision, specifically for birth control and contraceptives, has been consistently and repeatedly undermined since 2018 by both Congress and by the courts. And in just another example, in 2019, a rule was finalized to undermine the integrity of Title X. This is the United States' only family planning program that provides critical health care, including birth control services, wellness exams, and breast cancer and cervical cancer screenings. The Title X funds support community health centers, public health clinics, and other not-for-profit medical organizations focused on providing care to those with the least in our society. This new rule, known as the Domestic Gag Rule 34, prohibits providers that receive Title X funding from referring patients for abortion services or providing any information or even counseling related to abortion. It also requires the physical separation between abortion services and other health services. Since the rule's implementation in 2019, dozens of Title X grantees, including the organization that I work for, Planned Parenthood of Central and Western New York, have left the program's network, and more than 1.6 million women have been unable to access vital family planning services. Frankly, this is bad for public health outcomes and costs. Investing in family planning services helps to prevent unplanned pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections, cervical cancer, and breast cancer, as well as other critical health outcomes. For every public health dollar spent on family planning services, it results in a taxpayer savings of $7.09. So the message over the past 4 years has been received clearly. Lawmakers, judges, and elected officials do not trust women to make what they see as the right decision. They're telling women over and over again, you don't know what's best for you, but we do. They exert control by legislation and legal code. If you don't trust women to do the right thing, then the next best thing is to just limit the menu of options. I can't just point fingers though. I've done it too, and more than once. In medical school, we are trained to be experts of the human body and how it goes wrong. After 4 years of intense studying, test taking, and countless hours in the hospital, we emerge as newly minted physicians. Between the knowledge gained in school and affirmed on many board exams and tests, as well as the pressure to be right and not make mistakes. After all, this is someone's life on the line. Young doctors are set up to feel like they know more than their patients do. And I fell into this trap too. My first years in practice on my own, I learned the hard way to trust my patients and their knowledge of their own bodies and their own health. And it was women who taught me this lesson. I'll share a few examples. A young mother enduring her first labor told me she was pretty sure that she needed to push. She felt like the baby had dropped and she just needed to do it. I had just checked her cervix not even an hour before, and it wasn't even close to completely dilated, which in Western medicine is a prerequisite for starting the pushing phase of labor. I told her it probably wasn't time yet, that she should have patience, that this was her first labor, and that things would take a while, and I'd come back in an hour or so to recheck her progress. I reminded her that it was a marathon, not a sprint, and left her room to get some rest in my own home. Not 10 minutes later, my pager and cell phone went off, alerting me to get back to her room stat. I raced down the hallway and burst into the room just in time to see the baby born. She knew what was happening in her body much better than I did. That night, I reflected that I needed to learn to open my ears and truly listen to my patients, to listen to the wisdom of women in labor and their inherent knowledge. I'll share another story. Early in my primary care practice, I got to know a young teacher well. She was struggling with depression and severe anxiety, which had been a long-term presence in her life. We spent significant time together working on the right blend of medications, meditation, therapy, and self-care, and things started to improve. As she described it, once her mental health had stabilized, she was able to pay better attention to her overall health, and specifically her physical health. She realized that her GI tract was dictating her life. After eating, she needed to know where a bathroom was because she'd need it. I connected these symptoms to her mental health, assuming that they were another manifestation of her underlying anxiety and depression. There are more nerve endings in the gut than anywhere else in the body, I told her. Our GI system is directly linked to our brain. For more than 6 months, we focused on tweaking her antidepressants and working on self-care and meditation at my direction, even though she kept telling me that her mood felt so much better and that these symptoms seemed different, separate. She came in to see me nearly a year after first reporting the GI symptoms and told me that she'd felt bad, but she'd gone behind my back to see a GI doctor at her family's suggestion. The GI doctor did some tests and had diagnosed her with celiac disease, an allergy to gluten. She had removed gluten from her diet and poof, all of her symptoms were resolved, gone. I felt terrible for the assumptions that I had made and for not doing a better job of truly listening to what she was telling me about her own body. She knew. These were important lessons for me to learn before moving into my current position, where the notion that women know what's best is challenged every single day. Every day, I, my staff, and my patients walk through a line of protesters with distressing signs, a megaphone, and messages reminding us that they know what's best and we do not. They tell me through a megaphone that I can have a better life, a better job. Many times they invoke the name of God or Jesus just to tell me that there's hope for me to be saved. What frustrates me more than that, though, is that they yell at our patients, telling them they will regret their decisions, or even worse, that they're going to hell. In my experience, the women who come to see us, who are pregnant when they cannot be, are incredibly deliberate and intentional. They have thought this decision through. They have, they have weighed their options, their obligations, their future, and their past, and they have come to the conclusion that they cannot be pregnant. I trust that they are making the best possible decisions for themselves. I now want to share an excerpt from the book, which I'll show you here, Life's Work, A Moral Argument for Choice by Dr. Willie Parker. He's an abortion provider and a lifelong Christian. I highly recommend the whole book, but wanted to share this passage today. Dr. Parker writes, "My audio tape collection was, by serendipity, queued up that day to the I've Been to the Mountaintop, Dr. King's final sermon, which I'd heard dozens, maybe hundreds of times. On that afternoon, however, as I wrestled with the fact that certain women were being denied healthcare services they sought because of someone else's idea of what they should do, I heard the sermon with new ears. As he nears the final rousing lines of the speech, 'Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness,' Dr. King recounts a story from the gospel, one that almost every Christian knows by heart, one that I myself was taught in Sunday school. In the story of the Good Samaritan, a man is lying, wounded and helpless, on the Jericho road, having been beaten up. He fell in with thieves, as Dr. King put it. Two men, a priest and a Levite, the first obligated to help others by vocation, and the second presumed to have a tribal familial affiliation with the victim, both bypassed the man, leaving him lying on the road. Finally, a Good Samaritan, a man with no good reason to give assistance, got down from his beast, decided not to be compassionate by proxy, as Dr. King said, and the Samaritan administered first aid and helped the man in need. Of the three, only the Samaritan was great, Jesus said." In his sermon, Dr. King begins to speculate, almost sardonically, on the reasons the first two might have hurried past the man, as wounded and desperate as the traveler was. Maybe they were frantically busy and late for a church meeting. Or maybe they were following a religious edict that required priests and Levites not to contaminate themselves by touching another human body in advance of a religious ritual. Or maybe they were devoted to a different, broader kind of civic assistance. Maybe they had joined a committee to improve the safety of travelers, a Jericho Road Improvement Association, as Dr. King put it. Maybe they felt it was better to deal with the problem from the causal root, rather than getting bogged down with an individual effect. And then Dr. King got to his point. It's possible that these men were afraid, he said. The Jericho Road is a dangerous road, and in Jesus's day, it was teeming with thieves. It's possible, Dr. King suggests, that the priest and the Levite were worrying, first and foremost, about their own skins and wished not to draw unwelcome attention or danger to themselves by dismounting from their animals or lingering over a person disabled by circumstance. Or it's possible that they felt the man on the ground was merely faking, part of a scheme to lure unwitting, soft-hearted travelers into an ambush. The priest and the Levite passed by the man because their first thought, Dr. King suggested, was fear for themselves. If I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? What made the Good Samaritan good in Dr. King's interpretation is that he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? Dr. Willie Parker describes this moment as a punch all at one in my spiritual gut. He writes, "The scripture came alive and it spoke to me. For the Samaritan, the person in need was a fallen traveler. For me, it was a pregnant woman. The earth spun, and with it, this question turned on its head. It became not, is it right for me as a Christian to perform abortions, but rather, is it right for me as a Christian to refuse to do them? And in that instant, I understood that I, like the Levite and the priest, had been afraid." So let's continue to promote a culture that trusts women to make the best decisions for themselves. Let's acknowledge our own fears, bias, and discomforts before casting judgment onto another person. Let's open our ears to listen and open our eyes to observe. When we decide that we know what is better for women, instead of trusting them to know their own bodies, then in effect, as a society, we fail to make the Good Samaritan decision. No one is stopping to dismount and get down to the level of the traveler, to pause and ask questions and understand the situation and perspective of that person. This is even more painful for women when this distrust comes from the people and the institutions that they have been told, taught, and believed are there to support them, to be with them in their hour of need. As my colleague, Dr. Willie Parker writes, sometimes women, having absorbed the lessons of Christian churches like the one in which I was raised, call the clinic to wonder aloud to anyone who answers the phone, will God forgive me? And if I happen to be on the other end, Dr. Parker writes, what I say in substance is this: I see no reason why a woman should feel herself deserving of a separation from God because of a decision that she has to make. The Jesus I love has a nonconformist understanding of his faith. He realizes that the petty rules and laws laid down by the fathers and authorities are meaningless, and that to believe in a loving God is to refuse to stand in judgment of any fellow mortal. I implore the church with a capital C and all of you to remember those lessons from the Good Samaritan. Let's trust that women are making the best possible decisions for themselves, and instead of casting doubt and judgment, instead climb down from our beast and reach out with a helping hand.
We are dancing Sarah's circle. We are dancing Sarah's circle. We are dancing Sarah's circle. Family, neighbors, all. Here we seek and find our story. Here we seek and find our story. Here we seek and find our story. Family, neighbors, all. We will trust in women's wisdom. We will trust in women's wisdom. We will trust in women's wisdom, family, neighbors, all. On and on the circles moving, on and on the circles moving, on and on the circles moving, family, neighbors, all.
Thank you, Bill. I'm just going to take a moment to reorient us back to those 4 mantras from the Heart Center meditation that we talked about before, and close on the thought of compassion, innate harmony, healing presence, and unconditional love. We'll be coming together now for the final hymn, which is There's a River Flowing in My Soul. Thank you all.
There's a river flowing
Let us extinguish our chalices together, and we will recite these words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.